The NHL trade deadline is the biggest thing late in the season, but how have those deals worked out and how have the players that were traded affected the playoffs? We'll talk about that and more next on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Friday, everyone, and welcome to the Friday episode of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts so you get new episodes as soon as they drop. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. I'm Gil Martin from Locked On Islanders. I'm joined every Friday by Rachel Donner of Locked On Flyers. How we doing, Rachel? Playoffs, we're in the thick of round one now.
I know. It's getting really exciting. I feel like we're at that point in the playoffs, though, when obviously like the venues change for game 3, right? And sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes in a series, that game 3 is the one win for a team on like a 4-1 kind of series end. And like, I'm not saying St. Louis that's you, but I'm maybe saying St. Louis that's you.
You know, it's I hear you, but 7 goals. I mean,
I know.
It was a pretty good performance. If that's
That's
one,
the thing.
that's a good one.
I know. And that's what I'm saying. Like, I'm sort of saying it, but I don't know, because that was an incredible performance there for sure.
It truly was. And I think, there have been a number of surprises around the playoffs and then some things that, have kind of gone according to plan. But we wanted to focus today on some of the big trade deadline moves and whether or not the players acquired by their new teams have paid off, because the trade deadline is such a big event and there's so much drama. And then, a lot of the time you don't look back and see how it's panning out. So, let's start with the Florida Panthers and the impact that their trade deadline moves have had so far. As I think they're a little bit, it's a little surprising that they're doing so well against the Lightning so far, based on how well the Lightning were playing down the stretch.
Yeah, and I would say Florida too. I mean, Florida was pretty inconsistent this season as a returning champion, so to speak. And I think that there were some question marks there. And they made a couple of trade deadline moves to try and answer those questions, especially on the blue line side of things. And they acquired Seth Jones, which, I think a lot of people were like, I don't know, like there's questions about Seth Jones as a defensive player. Like, what are we doing here? And, I think he's worked out really well, and he's gotten a ton of the workload minutes, especially with the injuries that Florida, and the suspension and everything that Florida has had to deal with. And I think, while you don't want your team to take a lot of penalties, in the series, they've been shorthanded 8 times thus far in 2 games, which is a lot. I would say it's a fair amount.
Yeah.
And they're at 87.5%. They've only allowed 1 shorthanded goal. Seth Jones has been a big part, gotten a ton of penalty kill minutes, got the most minutes in game 2 for the Florida Panthers on the blue line and for the team overall. And I just feel like that's been a solid addition and has absolutely helped them shut down what had been a more potent Tampa offense.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think, again, a lot of the time, the deals that make headlines are not the deals that make the biggest impact. And I think Seth Jones is a great case in point because, is he a little past his prime, perhaps? Maybe. Is he an all-star, future Hall of Famer? Probably not. But
Nope.
he's a quality player. He's experienced. He's been there before. He plays a smart, steady game, and he has really stepped up. And, it's almost like he's free from being on a losing team. Here he is in the playoffs getting a chance to shine, and he's taking full advantage of it.
Yeah, and of course, he hadn't played in the playoffs since his time in Columbus
Right.
and kind of spent that time in Chicago languishing. And I think this was a really good opportunity for him, and he was going to take full advantage of it. And I think it has paid dividends for the Florida Panthers. And I think that this team has a lot of expectations on them, given they are the defending Stanley Cup champions here. And with everything, I think that was kind of the main worry of this team is were they going to be able to have as strong a defense? And I feel like, this team has been able to like step up that extra notch that and given that Stanley Cup playoff experience from last year, they know what it takes. And the fact that they almost got there in previous years. Like this is a team that knows how to win the cup. And Seth
Yeah.
Jones has the playoff experience to be able to like fold that into the greater picture for Florida in a way that I think has been super helpful.
Yeah, I think it really has been. And look, again, just doing the little things. You talked about the penalty kill minutes, 4 hits, 1 block shot, an assist. He's just doing those little things that make a big difference, especially in a close playoff game. And you look at the statistics from game 2. Bobrovsky gets a shutout, but he only faced 19 shots in the entire game.
Yeah, I think that's the stat right there, right? As far as the Florida defense. And I know they're a shot blocking crew there, but also I think they play a solid defensive structure that prevents a lot of shots in the first place. So, and I do think that Seth Jones has been a huge part of the tail end of the season and heading into the playoffs here. Now, the Brad Marchand deal, I think a little different, right? That was just kind of like to add some veteran leadership and somebody who can always step it up in the playoffs and just plays on that line that I think fits well with the Florida Panthers style of play here. And, he's gotten a solid amount of minutes. And I don't know if he's been like a major contributor, but I certainly think it's been helpful having him in the lineup, right?
Yeah, I think it has. And you realize the playoff experience, the grit, the clutch performances that he's had over the course of his career. I just love, the fact that he's healthy and back in the lineup. I love that addition for the intangibles even more than anything else, perhaps.
Yeah, and I think that was a part of it too, right? That if you're going to add people to your roster, right, who are, definitely past their prime, like who you need somebody like that with the experience that he has. And that he's not going to take over the leadership in the room, but he's going to certainly enhance the leadership in the room, right?
Absolutely. And, again, at this stage of his career, is he going to be a dominant player for, 82 games, if he even can play 82 games? No. But maybe that one game that turns a series, at that one moment, a guy like Marchand, who's been there, done that, won, led, maybe he turns that one critical moment or just calms down his teammates at that one critical moment. And that just has an impact on a series that maybe you don't see just watching the game on TV.
Yeah, I think so. And, now obviously the series turns to Florida in the Battle of Florida. They're going to the East Coast of of Florida, as they say. But I think, you know, that is just such a tremendous advantage to have won both games on the road and utilizing those moves they made at the trade deadline. And that's what a championship team does is they make those little tweaks that keeps them at that level for as long as they can. And I think it was really smart by the Panthers.
Yeah, again, it's not always the loudest moves, but it's the smartest moves that get it done. And I think Florida has done a good job. Whether they go on another long run, whether they repeat, that remains to be seen. But early results, they're paying some dividends, these moves.
Yeah, I think so. I think so.
We have got a lot more to discuss on today's show. The biggest deal at the trade deadline, Mikko Rantanen, big rivalry, big series. We'll discuss the impact of Rantanen so far in the playoffs. All that and more coming up on today's Locked On NHL podcast. Do you know that your Fire TV is also an Xbox? Turn any TV into your gaming and entertainment hub with Fire TV Stick 4K devices. No console required. Just grab your paired controller, subscribe, or sign into Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with EA Play included, and you're ready to play. Dive into hundreds of premium titles from EA Sports College Football 25 to Call of Duty Black Ops 6 and Avowed as easily as you stream your favorite TV shows. It's gaming made simple, and it's all on your Fire TV. With 4K streaming, you can watch more than 1.5 million movies and TV episodes from your favorite subscribed services like Netflix, Prime Video, Disney Plus, Max, and more. So head to Amazon.com/Fire TV Locked On to get started. Xbox Game Pass Ultimate subscription and compatible controller required. Available on select devices, including Fire TV Stick 4K 2nd Gen, Fire TV Stick 4K Max 1st and 2nd Gen, and Fire TV Cube 3rd Gen. Amazon Fire TV. Check it out today. So the Mikko Rantanen trade was the biggest story going into the trade deadline, and you get this perfect first-round matchup where Rantanen with the Dallas Stars is facing the team he started the season with in the Colorado Avalanche. A lot of bad blood there, a lot of controversy, two really good teams. How has this deal worked out so far, though, for the Dallas Stars?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because Rantanen hasn't really been that big of a scoring threat in this series so far, but that hasn't necessarily negatively affected Dallas. So I think that's the interesting part of it, right, from a Dallas perspective.
Yeah, and they're up in the series 2-1, and they are finding a way to get wins. And to me, it was incredible that they were able to play well. I mean, and Rantanen had an assist in the last game, but here was this emotional return for Gabriel Landeskog, and the building was rocking. And Dallas did find a way, and Rantanen was a part of it. He had 5 shots on goal in that game. He picked up an assist, and when you win 2-1 and he's assisting on one of the 2 goals, he clearly was doing something right, and he assisted on the overtime game winner by Tyler Seguin.
Yeah, and so I think the contribution has been there. It just hasn't been a dominant contribution, I guess, is what I'm saying. And I don't think it really doesn't, I think, make the Dallas Stars any better or worse than they were before. I think it's just like another guy that's there. We'll see how he contributes as part of the team. I just think this is an already good team is really what it boils down to. And so did they need him? I don't know. When it all comes out in the wash, is he contributing? Yes. So I think to me, this is like a to be determined from a Dallas perspective. I think, from a Colorado perspective, I don't know that this was the move, in terms of choosing him to be the one that they send away in all of this. I don't know that that was bad either. I think it's like there are no winners and there are no losers here so far. But again, we've got more games to play in this particular series between those 2 teams. I think what's interesting, is the Carolina Hurricanes aspect of it all, because obviously, as we know, he was originally traded to Carolina, who then had to
Yeah.
flip him at the deadline. And Logan Stankoven has had a really nice contribution to Carolina in their playoffs so far.
He really has. And, I think that's almost like an example of the Hurricanes getting lemons and making lemonade out of it. It didn't work out. You then have to turn around and try to make the best of a situation that, you tried to make the big move and you just couldn't reach an agreement with him. And so you salvage what you can, and maybe it works out even better for Carolina than it was working out for Dallas.
Yeah, that's, I think, what's interesting here, because, you're looking at Logan Stankoven, his stats so far in the playoffs. He's got 2 goals in the series. He scored 2 against the Devils in game 1 in that win. And, I think we all knew he was a good player, but he didn't really pop as much in the regular season as I think a lot of people might have expected. He was definitely one of those rookies that, kind of wasn't in the spotlight as much as Macklin Celebrini or Lane Hudson, for instance. But he was a rookie with a lot of promise. And so I don't know that he lived up to it as much in the regular season, but he's certainly making a statement for himself in the playoffs here. And, for a rookie to be getting 15 minutes in a playoff series, I think that's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, and he's making a contribution, as you mentioned, offensively. And think about this. He's only going to grow. I mean, he's only going to grow into his role with the team. His best hockey is ahead of him. So long term, this is a great deal. And short term, he is making an impact. So I got to give credit so far to Carolina. Now, look, New Jersey is banged up. This is not even New Jersey is not even New Jersey right now, based on all the injuries that they're dealing with. So it is, not to insult the Devils, but it is a relatively easy opponent given all the injuries. You want to see the long-term impact, but I think over the long haul, they'll do very well with Stankoven.
And even the other player piece in that deal, which also, as we know, got Carolina a whole slew of draft picks in it, but Taylor Hall was part of that trade as well. Ironically, briefly a New Jersey Devil earlier in his career, but he's like an older guy, not the same player as Brad Marchand, let's be clear, but same age group, I would say. And, he's been contributing as well. He's got a couple of assists in the 2 games that they've played. And I think that, if Carolina turns out to be the winner in all this, I think it'll be deliciously ironic for all involved.
It will definitely be deliciously ironic. And then obviously, depending on what happens in this series between Colorado and Dallas and how much Rantanen contributes, there could be even more irony involved in this situation. So, following Mikko Rantanen throughout this season has been an adventure in itself.
Yeah, I think so. And, obviously none of these series are over, right? I mean, you could say the Carolina Devils series is over in some ways because of, the Devils circumstances, to your point. I think that, the Dallas Colorado is obviously 2-1. So still anything can happen here. But I do think Colorado has to make some changes, I think, in terms of their what they're doing offensively, because I think they have to figure out how to adjust. But I do think that there is some extra motivation that Dallas has here, specifically because of Rantanen. And I think that just makes it more interesting of a playoff series.
And I think Colorado has a certain amount of incentive because of Rantanen as well. So it's, the opposite side of the same coin. But it's going to be, to me, just as a hockey fan, that series is just so fascinating.
Yeah, I think, it's one of those series that you can't really draw up ahead of time because you think it's too perfect of a
Right.
scenario, and then it comes to pass, and then it turns into this kind of a series that's super close with, really, like, tight scoring, tight checking, and I think that when you have a narrative of a trade deadline deal attached to a series like this, I think that makes it better, and I think that's what makes the trade deadline so interesting from a big picture perspective, right? Because you have these teams that make moves, some of whom are making these moves to get into the playoffs, and some of these teams are making the moves to try to extend their playoff run and get all of the assets that they need and just take the remaining games of the season to integrate new pieces into their lineup in a way so that they're a well-oiled machine heading into the playoffs, and that new person who is highly skilled is adding something to the team here. Now sometimes it's a depth piece that they just need to plug and play, but this was not a depth piece
No.
situation at all,
No.
right? So that's where I think, especially given like the last 2 games ended in overtime after that, blowout win by Colorado, to have the Stars win the next 2 in overtime. That just shows that the Stars have been able to adjust. And I think, having that trade deadline deal is extra motivation to make it work and to make those adjustments.
Yeah, so many games within the game in this series. I love it. I this one, if any series is going 7, I've got this one earmarked for 7 games. So we'll see.
Yeah, I did pick the Avs in 7, but, we'll see how it plays out for this
We
one.
shall see. Gonna be a fun ride, whichever however it ends. It's gonna be a fun ride. All right, more deadline impact deals to discuss. We're gonna do that coming up next on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
The Stanley Cup playoffs are, of course, here. And if you've never been to a live NHL playoff game, it's unlike anything else. The intensity, the speed, the energy in the building, it is next level. And thanks to Game Time, getting in the door is easier and more affordable than ever. Game Time is the fastest way to grab playoff tickets, even for those must see matchups, and prices actually drop as puck drop gets closer. And with those last minute deals, you can save up to 60% for sports, concerts, comedy, and my personal favorite, the theater. And their all-in pricing shows that total cost up front, so you won't be surprised to check out. The app even shows you panoramic seat views, so you know exactly what you're getting before you buy. And with that Game Time ticket coverage, I know I'm protected, whether it's cancellation or job loss assurance or that 24-hour return guarantee. You can take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
So, what other deals are you keeping an eye on that really have impacted the playoffs so far? Or maybe disappointedly not impacted the playoffs so far?
Yeah, it is interesting. I think on the plus side, I mean, I think the Kuzmenko to the LA Kings deal was kind of a throwaway in a lot of ways. They didn't pay much for it. And I know because the Flyers were on the other end of that deal. And it was kind of surprising from a Flyers perspective that they did it because, you know, they didn't get much in return. I suppose it was like, sure, get an extra draft pick, but you didn't think that he would have a huge impact for the Kings and in this playoff race so far. But he has been a key contributor. He's scoring, he's playing well, and he does bring a certain level of energy that I think does add to your team. He's got like intangibles, and the fact that he's added actual scoring on top of that, I think kind of is the promise that even like the Flames thought that that's what he would bring to them to get into the playoffs, which of course, as we know, did not happen.
Right. Yeah, he has had an impact. And you look at the Kings I am surprised how the Kings have been, able to put so many pucks into the net, all things considered, against Edmonton. Edmonton seems to be reverting back to a form we haven't seen them play in a couple of years.
Well, I think goaltending has something to do with that too. And,
Yeah.
the fact that the Oilers actually scored a lot in that first game as well. But I think the Kings were able to tamper things down much better in game two, but still maintain that level of scoring. That's obviously a defensive and goaltending problem on the Oilers side, but you still have to execute, right?
Right.
Because you still have to get those goals. And I think that when you look at what the Kings have been able to do, I think they were smart at the trade deadline. They didn't, trade anybody away. They didn't overpay for anybody to try and make a splashy move. Again, they just were smart and made one of those depth moves that they needed to be able to plug and play a little bit better. And I think, that's really smart. And I think that, we'll see what Kuzmenko does moving forward, but in the small 2-game sample that we have, so far, so good, right?
So far, so good. I think he's exceeded expectations really so far, offensively at least. And, you mentioned not overpaying. That is always important because let's face it, A, only one team each year wins the Stanley Cup. And B, the bill always comes due, whether it's a lost draft pick, a lost prospect. So, right now, you give away your number one prospect in a trade deadline deal. You may not feel that right away, but 2-3 years down the road, and when that player becomes an impact player for the other team, you want that guy back. All of a sudden, you didn't make the Stanley Cup final. You got your trade deadline deal. It helped to whatever extent. And then you're without this prospect who you really, really wanted and really is helping another team.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, I do think you have to kind of look at the other side of things a little bit with teams that either made splashy moves to get to the playoffs, but now haven't found as much success, or didn't make any moves at all and still made the playoffs. I think that's, Montreal, right?
Yeah.
Is the latter category there, where they're like, no, we're going to stick where we are because we know that this is a team that's built for the future. And if we make the playoffs this year, that's great, but we'll do it on our own terms with who we have now, because that's who we're going with in the future. And I think that's what makes this season a success for Montreal, almost more than anything. And this, obviously they've struggled in the playoff series here against a very, very good Washington Capitals team. And Montreal has played well. That's the thing, is that they've continued. They've held their own against the Caps. They've played their game. They've utilized the players that they have. And so I think, again, not making any moves was the right thing to do for this team. And I would say you're looking at a slightly different scenario with the Ottawa Senators here, because they did make splashy moves, right? So they traded and got Dylan Cousins here, and made the Fabian Zetterlund move as well. And Zetterlund hasn't really gotten on the score sheet here, but these moves, I think, got them into the playoffs. It carried them through the remaining part of the season. And now they've come up against a really tough Toronto Maple Leafs team here in what I think is an excellent series for sure. But when you look at it in the results, I know we've had 2 overtime games in a row here and they've kept it close. But also, it feels like the Leafs are a much better team in a lot of ways.
And they probably are.
Yeah.
And I think the thing that a lot of people overlook, this Maple Leafs team is more playoff style ready than most of the teams that, had high expectations and came up short in the past. This team has better goaltending, better defense. They play a different style of hockey, and we'll see whether or not that's good enough to end the 58-year jinx that the Maple Leafs have dealt with as far as not winning a Stanley Cup. But, we're still early in the playoffs, and yet we've already
Of
seen
course.
the impact of a lot of these trade deadline deals, both positive and negative, and we'll see how it continues to play out throughout the rest of the Stanley Cup playoffs this year. I want to thank you for making Locked On NHL your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the all-new Locked On NHL Game Night. Every game, every night until a Stanley Cup champion is crowned. Get local analysis on a national scale. Find NHL Game Night on Locked On NHL on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Rachel, I know you will be here tomorrow with Erica El Ayala for our weekly women's hockey spotlight, so looking forward to that. I'll be back on Monday interviewing 3 of our local hosts about the biggest stories from around the NHL. So Locked On NHL has you covered throughout the Stanley Cup playoffs every day and wall to wall. Have a great weekend, everybody, and thank you so much for watching and listening to the Locked On NHL podcast.